Welcome to Maniac Movies, and we are doing Pawn Shop Chronicles today. I do updates Wednesdays and Fridays, and yeah, like, share, and subscribe. Let's talk about a movie that shows you what Pulp Fiction would have been like if it had been written by Rob Zombie.
Where the hell you been?
Oh, I had to pawn my shotgun to get gas money.
Man, how the hell we gonna rob Stanley without a shotgun?
This ring belonged to my wife. I want you to tell me who sold you this ring. Where does he live? I'm gonna get creative.
I'm beginning to hallucinate, man.
I swear I saw Elvis.
Thank you very much.
An army of naked zombie women.
Oh my God.
Boy, there's something.
Alright, so Pawn Shop Chronicles was directed by Wayne Kramer, and Wayne Kramer is a fairly established director at this point in his career. This movie was released in 2013. His breakout movie was The Cooler, which was a very successful and very good crime movie starring William H. Macy and Alec Baldwin. And The Cooler is this classical Scorsesean, straight-up mob movie about Vegas, and it's a really good movie. Then he followed it up with a movie called Running Scared, starring Paul Walker, that in its best moments feels like Grand Theft Auto the movie, but in its worst moments feels like a deranged children's movie with a hard R. Running Scared it's an experience. Then he did a Harrison Ford movie called, I believe, Crossing Over, about border crossing, which was very basic and blah. And about the only thing that came out of that movie was that Australian actress Alice Eve. Her career took off a little bit from that movie because of her giant talents that got shown during a sex scene with Ray Liotta. But otherwise, that movie's almost completely forgotten. I always forget it exists. I only remembered it because I was researching this movie. I was like, oh yeah, that was a thing that came out in the late 2000s. But they did Pawn Shop Chronicles. Now, Pawn Shop Chronicles reunites him with his Running Scared star, Paul Walker. Now, Paul Walker is also an executive producer on this towards the end of his career before his tragic death, right after this movie was released, actually. He was getting more into producing. He produced several of his final films, and I believe he had started his own production company. But yeah, Paul Walker stars in this, but that's not to say he's in the whole movie because this is an anthology movie. So it's three stories, and the wraparound is all built around this giant pawn shop. I mean, it's a big-ass pawn shop, too. It's run by Vincent D'onofrio. So Vincent D'onofrio is best known for playing, Piles in Full Metal Jacket, the overweight cadet in Full Metal Jacket, and then the villain in the original Men in Black, and the main character in Law and Order SVU. And since then, he's a pop-up actor. He shows up and stuff. But, he runs it, and it's not clear if this guy that always hangs out there is just his best friend or if he's a co-owner, but he's always got his buddy there, played by Mcbride. And Mcbride, or Chi McBride, I'm actually not positive how you pronounce that guy's name, but he was the black ghost in The Frighteners, and he was the boss, Will Smith's boss in iRobot. He played a lot of boss characters, actually. He was often the, he was the boss in Narc. I think he was the boss on some cop show I didn't watch. But they're just these kind of cranky old rednecks who spend their days bullshitting in this pawn shop. And the pawn shop is redneck as it can be. It's just basically just a giant warehouse full of junk with a giant Confederate flag on the front of it. And this is Deep South. The Pawn Shop Chronicles is Deep South. So it's dirt roads and Confederate flags everywhere. They even mention the Klan's still in this area. It's the kind of place where there's two barber shops, and you're only allowed to go to one of them because the other one hates the other. Like, there's this running thing where the two barbers in the town hate each other. So Pawn Shop Chronicles was released towards the end of what I think of as the edgelord 2000s, because in the 2000s they were pushing the envelope as hard as it could be, like just hard enough to tear it into. Like you could go to your local multiplex in the 2000s and see stuff that would get you canceled in a heartbeat today. Like, I still remember the experience of seeing Hostel Part 2 just in the local theater, just playing it. And Hostel Part 2 has an extended sequence where a nude woman has another naked lady tied hanging upside down above her and slashes her throat, then starts masturbating with the blood. And this was a wide theatrical release. This shit would so not fly today. It is amazing how sensitive we've become in the last 10 years. And frankly, Pawn Shop Chronicles would not fly today. But, and a big part of that is the reason that it's always edging around the idea of racism without ever really confronting it. It's just a part of the culture in this very deep South area. And I don't remember if they said what state it is. I want to say Alabama, but I could be completely wrong. So basically, like I said, it's three stories, and all three stories and somehow have a jumping off point at this pawn shop. And the first story is instigated when, and there's also this weird thing where they kind of make it look like a comic book, and I have no idea why they bothered doing that. That was kind of a stupid gimmick. The writer on this is actually an actor. He played Carol, skinny ass Carol with the gray hair from The Walking Dead. Carol's abusive husband in the first season of The Walking Dead. I believe he got killed and turned into a zombie, or maybe he got bitten and someone shot him. It's been, what, 15? God, The Walking Dead has been on forever. Why won't they end that show? But he played that, but he also has occasionally written, and even I think he's even directed a little bit. Yeah, the most notorious thing he's written is actually Ankle Biters, which, from what I understand, is among the worst vampire films ever made. It's about dwarf vampires. But yeah, I've heard it's god awful. This movie I actually like, but it's certainly not without its flaws. So the first story, it starts off with Lucas Haas. Now Lucas Haas is that skinny, gangly actor that I know best from Mars Attacks. He was the teenage kid that accidentally discovers that bad music makes Martians' head explodes. Sure, it was a Tim Burton movie, whatever. But he's popped up in a few other things. But he goes to a pawn shop and gets himself wants to get himself a gun because he and his two idiot friends are planning to rob this meth cook. But when he goes to the meeting place where they're supposed to meet him, they just run his ass down with a truck because apparently he owed someone some money. But then that just kind of feeds into the misadventures of these two junky-ass rednecks played by Kevin Rankin, who is a TV guy. If you watched a lot of TV shows in the 2000s, you saw him in something. I know him best from Justified, the Timothy Olyphant show about the redneck cops. And he was a character called Devil in that, and he was kind of an evil henchman character in that show. But he was also on Breaking Bad. He was one of the white supremacist gang in the last season of Breaking Bad. I think I read that he was also in 6 Feet Under, although I didn't watch that show. I even read that he was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So he got a lot of work in the television. The last thing I saw him in was Hell or High Water. He was the guy that worked at the bank. But it's Kevin Rankin and Paul Walker. Now Paul Walker, he was a very subdued actor, and that's kind of what stopped him from ever becoming a true A-lister. Was he's a very laid-back actor most of the time, but somehow Wayne Kramer could get that guy to crank it to 11. You know, because Paul Walker, like I said, he always just had a very laid-back, what's up, man, like kind of quality to him, and that made him. He was sort of a character actor in a leading man's body in a way, but again, Wayne Kramer could get that guy into the movie. Like Running Scared, he's like Ray Liotta. He is at a 10 in Running Scared, and he's at a 10 here. And this is actually a really good performance. Not that it's terribly complex, because I mean, basically he's playing a skeevy redneck. Like he has the Confederate flag just tattooed on his forearms. He looks like a guy you'd see hanging outside of a Home Depot at like 11 a.m. just asking everybody if they had some work for him or if they could just spare a couple bucks because he's trying to get down the street. Like that kind of guy. Like his hair's all messy. He's 5 o'clock shadow. He looks like hell, but it's actually a really good performance because you don't see any of Paul Walker in the performance. His character's called Raw Dog. Okay, so it's just the misadventures of these two junky morons. And Kevin Rankin is actually more put together. He's at least got his clothes. He's shaven, but he's constantly grinding his teeth, which is a strong indicator that you're on meth. Is that you do that nervous habit of grinding your teeth. I actually knew a guy that used to grind his teeth. He chipped one of his teeth. He would grind his teeth so bad. It looked gnarly. But, so it's just these two morons going around, and it's basically just the dumbest criminals you could ever imagine. They crash their truck, which also has a giant Confederate flag on the top of it. And they're just trying to get together some weapons to rob a meth cook. And the meth cook is played by Norman Reedus. Norman Reedus, also of The Walking Dead. And the funny thing about Norman Reedus is that even though he's front and center on the poster, you never see his face in this movie. He's wearing one of those big gas masks you have to wear to cook meth, because otherwise you'll get trashed on your own supply, in every scene he's in. But it is Norman Reedus. It's not like they had a body double and they just dropped in his voice. You can tell by the body type and everything. It actually is him. He just legitimately wears a mask in every scene of the movie. But it's a very simple and straightforward story. It has some really funny parts. And actually, what made me think of doing this movie tonight was because one of the conversations Paul Walker and Kevin Rankin, as the two white trash redneck thieves, have is where Paul Walker asks Kevin Rankin, like, why are we supposed to hate Jewish people? And Kevin Rankin is like, I don't know, okay? That's just what they tell us at the meetings. I don't know, because they're both supposed to be in the clans. Like, I don't know why we're supposed to hate them. I don't get it. And that, because we've been discussing a lot of stuff about anti-Semitism lately in the news, and I've always thought that, like, racism, I mean, that deals with in-group and out-group preference, and that at least I can wrap my head around, even if it's dumb as hell. But the idea of hating someone over religious differences is like, you literally have to ask them first before you can decide if you hate them. You don't even know yet until you're like, okay, so what denomination are you? Oh, you're a Jewish person. That means I'm supposed to hate. Like, that's always been just immeasurably stupid to me, is the idea of just having to ask someone if you are supposed to hate them or not. Anyway, so that's what made me think of this movie, because I was actually going to do something different tonight, but one of my favorite channels randomly picked the movie I was planning on doing tonight, so thank you, Sinister Cinema. I was going to do Nightbreed, but whatever. So Pawn Shop Chronicles, and then into the second story, because that story ends, at the end of that story, they finally get masked, and this part's kind of funny too, because they get masked to rob the meth coat, and Paul Walker is going to wear a clown mask, and that was in the script. He was supposed to wear a clown mask, and evidently they waited the last minute or something. They couldn't find a clown mask anywhere, and they didn't have the time or money to make a clown mask from scratch. You guys actually just flashed behind me on the trailer there. So what they did was they like overnight ordered something from Slipknot's website. You know, the heavy metal band, Left Behind, People Equal Shit. What else did they have? Vermilion. But one of the members is clown. He wears a clown mask. Every member of Slipknot wears wears a different mask. So they ordered that, then just kind of repainted it to look like a normal clown. And of course, the robbery goes terribly wrong. And Norman Reedus has this great moment where he's like, "Man, I hope you guys don't do this shit for a living." Like it was really good. And it's easy to forget at this point that Norman Reedus was once a really interesting and offbeat character actor, because he's basically just decided he's going to sit his ass in The Walking Dead and collect paychecks until he dies. Because he doesn't do much outside of that show. And even on that show, he weirdly doesn't do much anymore. For the last few, I mean, I quit watching a couple years ago, but for the last few seasons, it seemed like they were just kind of using him as sparingly as possible, and he was barely ever in it, but whatever. He's not in this movie a whole lot either, to be perfectly honest. This is basically a cameo for him. But then we get into the second story. Now, the second story is the best of the three, which, and it stars Matt Dillon. And Matt Dillon's an actor I really like. I actually did a video on his movie, The House That Jack Built, not that long ago, a couple weeks ago. And in that I mentioned that Matt Dillon is a great actor, but his voice has kind of kept him from ever really becoming a true top-tier movie star. And it's because he sounds like a guy who would threaten to break your legs for walking on his side of the street in New York City. He just has that voice, that street guy voice, which is basically assured that every role he gets in his entire career is going to be either as a thug or a moron. I mean, if you really look at his career, almost every role he's either a villain or an idiot. That's just all he plays. Whether you look at Drugstore Cowboy, Crash, The House That Jack Built, To Die For, Rumblefish, The Outsiders, just his entire career, he's assholes or he's idiots. And in this movie, it's kind of walking the line, because essentially what his story is a very condensed revenge story. His entire story is just a whole revenge movie condensed into this short segment of this movie, where he shows up at the pawn shop, and he's had this kind of money issue where he's going to temporarily, because a pawn shop, you can put something on layaway and they can't sell it for, I think it's 60 days. And pawn shops are kind of a dying breed because of eBay. It's actually sort of hard to find one that does anything except for jewelry or weapons. But he's just recently gotten married, and he takes his fiance, or his bride, to this pawn shop, and he has to pawn her wedding ring to get the money to get some stuff taken care of real quick so they can get out of there. But then, and his fiance is played by Ashlee Simpson, and Ashlee Simpson, who's best known for her debacle where she kept getting caught lip syncing, because apparently she can't sing to save her life, but her sister Jessica Simpson was a very famous singer. And Ashlee Simpson then tried to transition into acting, which didn't work out for her either, and then she ended up with a bit part in Pawn Shop Chronicles. She's in, I think, 3 scenes of this whole movie. But, so Matt Dillon, while he's there, he sees a ring that he recognizes, and this belonged to his first wife, who mysteriously went missing. And then the whole story is just him rampaging through this little town, trying to figure out how his missing wife, she disappeared under mysterious circumstance, how her ring ended up in this tiny little pawn shop in the middle of nowhere. So he's just beats the hell out of everybody in town, including Michael Cudlitz, who played Abraham in The Walking Dead's 5th. I think he was interested in the 5th season, probably lasted till about 7th or 8th. The big redheaded guy with the big mustache. What was his favorite famous line? "Who's Diana?" Just the way he delivered that line was pretty funny. But in this, he just gets his ass kicked by Matt Dillon in one scene. Yeah, so Matt Dillon's just following the breadcrumbs, and what leads him to Psychopath, played by Elijah Wood. And Elijah Wood's a very good villain. You should also see him in the Maniac remake, if you haven't seen that. Elijah Wood is a really good, Elijah Wood is just an interesting actor. Elijah Wood, of course, famous child star from Free Willy, who then did the Lord of the Rings movies, and he's a little too odd, and he's a little too feminine, I guess, to really star in normal movies. So instead, he does stuff like Wilfred, where his neighbor's dog was a guy in a dog suit and he was apparently insane the entire show, or plays a villain, or he plays like the creepy stalker guy in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. He's a pop-up actor, but he's an interesting pop-up actor. Last year he did that movie Come to Daddy, which was a very interesting, weird indie. Like he's an actor that is fun to kind of just watch what he's going to do next because it's so unconventional. But in this, he's a straight up psychopath who has been kidnapping women and basically torturing them and brainwashing them. And he keeps them in these tiny little dog cages, nude, in his shed. And like I said, this movie, like I said, Edgelord 2000, this movie was going way further than you would ever dream of going today. You would just have a pyramid, I'm not lying, a pyramid of little dog cages. So those tiny little ass dog cages with a naked woman in each one in a pyramid. It's probably, if I was guessing, for maybe 15 women altogether. And it turns out Matt Dillon's was like his favorite. Matt Dillon's wife was his favorite. And she's played by Pell James. And the director in the commentary actually says that the original actress who was supposed to play this role, because I mean the entire role is frontal nudity. It's no clothes the entire movie. Well, the entire role. And the original actress like quit on the spot, like, changed my mind, not doing it. And Pell James was a last minute fill-in, and evidently she was married to the president of Lionsgate Films at the time. So he's like, I have the wife of one of the most famous men in Hollywood just walking around smeared in dirt naked in every scene she's in. Wonder how this is going to affect my career. Apparently not so great, because he hasn't directed a movie since this. So, but he rescues her, and she has her own deep Stockholm syndrome, and it leads to a fairly dark ending. And then we get to the third story. And this one is the weakest of the three, and most people who review this point out that it loses steam towards the end, because first off, it stars Brendon Fraser, and Brendon Fraser is actually a pretty good actor. He's kind of a weird one in that he could have, after The Mummy, the original The Mummy, he could have been an A-list movie star, but instead he really wanted to do comedies in it. But he's weird because he seems to prefer to do either comedies or really highbrow art films. It's like he'd either rather do Monkey Bone or The Quiet American, or what was that, Gods and Monsters with Ian McKellen. Like, he likes doing art films and he likes doing really lowbrow comedy. But in this one, it's a pretty lowbrow comedy role because he's just this doofy Elvis impersonator, Elvis Presley. And he's a loser, he's broke, he's just traveling around with his girlfriend. And as it goes on, he kind of, come to think of it, I believe Ashlee Simpson played his girlfriend, not Matt Dillon's wife. I think Ashlee Simpson was Brendon Fraser's girlfriend. And Matt Dillon, I don't remember who played his wife. Yeah, I think Ashlee Simpson is Brendon Fraser's girlfriend. But regardless, his girlfriend's getting tired of traveling around with him, being broke, doing these shitty little jobs at state fairs. And I mean, good God, even by 2013, no one was paying to see Elvis impersonators anymore. I mean, Brendon Fraser, good guy. I think he would have been like 2 when Elvis died. So, and that's kind of the problem with the segment, is that it's such an old school thing to begin with. Is that do Elvis impersonators still exist? I guess maybe, but not in any kind of numbers. That was a big thing. It actually was. Elvis impersonators were a big thing in the really late 70s, 80s, and 90s. In the 90s, they were already becoming a bit of a joke. But like Quentin Tarantino even played an Elvis impersonator in an episode of The Golden Girls. So, I mean, Elvis impersonators were a big thing, but not by 2013. But no one cared by then. But I get that's kind of the joke, but it also just is an old joke. It's a played out joke. So the whole thing is that he's tired of being a loser, and he's essentially, after introduced to this weird feud in town where they're fighting over, there's these 2 barbers who are right next to each other fighting over business. He is kind of at his lowest point ever. He's broke. His girl left him. He's got nothing. And this he gets on to do his show at the end of it. And the show's going really poorly, and then he apparently has sold his soul to the devil to be a successful Elvis impersonator. So, yeah, this movie's as weird as it sounds, but it's entertaining. It's a very fast-paced movie, and even though the third act, the third story, is kind of lame as hell, it's overall very, like I said, if you can laugh at rednecks, and I live in the South, so I can certainly laugh at rednecks. I have rednecks in my family. It's pretty damn funny. The first segment is really funny. The second segment is actually really good. It's really engaging and dark and twisted. And the third segment just kind of runs out of steam. But I like most of this movie, and it's a 2 hour movie, so it's got way more good than bad in it. It's got some good jokes in it. It's got this dwarf, I mean a legit dwarf, like about 3 feet tall, riding around in this massive black truck, blaring metalcore, and he's got like this death grudge against someone in town, and you get a lot of good, entertaining cameos here. Thomas Jane from The Punisher and The Mist shows up in one scene. Elijah Wood is good in his quick little role. So one thing I will definitely fault this movie on is that I would say a movie should have a strong sense of internal logic. A movie should make sense consistently from beginning to end. And the only way to make this movie make sense is that there's a supernatural element, but we don't spend a lot of time on that. The supernatural element is introduced pretty much at the end, and it's apparently was the director's idea because the writer has said that he had just written a movie about a bunch of hillbillies. Like those are his words. These guys are just supposed to be a bunch of hillbillies. But by the end, there's no way there's not a supernatural component to this. That a character that clearly should be dead is alive again. A character has apparently sold his soul to the devil. So it's a weird movie, but it's a fun movie to watch with people. At least people that aren't easily offended, because people that are easily offended might get mad at you. But this is also the kind of flick where you're likely to show it to a group of people and they'll have a great time, they'll laugh, and they'll talk through the whole movie, and at the end of it they'll say, that sucked. It's like, yeah, well, you were having fun. It is a dumb, all over the place movie. Like I said, this is redneck Pulp Fiction. And this was also towards the end of the era when people were even bothering to rip off Pulp Fiction. The whole interlocking stories all revolving around crime with a weird, dark sense of humor. Like, there was a ton of those in the late 90s. This is almost 20 whole years after Pulp Fiction was made. So this is one of the last times you'll probably see someone rip off Pulp Fiction's formula. But you get a good Matt Dillon performance in there. You get a really good Paul Walker performance in there. Vincent D'onofrio is fun. If you like Brendon Fraser, he's fine. Elijah Wood. So overall, the cast is really solid. The kind of kinetic camera work, like I said, this is a very 2000s movie, even though this came out a few years after the 2000s ended. So if you like those kind of movies, and you may have missed this one, it's definitely one worth checking out. So yeah, overall, I like it. I don't love it, but I like it, and I do like how it's of a different time. That, today, if you were going to make a movie about a bunch of rednecks, you would invariably have to be a lot more politically correct about it. But this one, you're just allowed to have fun with the idea of these dumb small town freaks. That's what this is. This movie's about dumb small town freaks. And there are certainly good folks in small towns. I came from a small town. Not all small towns are like this. This is just a really jacked up, methed out small town. If you can laugh at the South, you can laugh at this. And like I said, I'm from the South. I can absolutely find the humor in this because I know some crazy-ass rednecks. Anyway, my next update will be Friday, and I have not decided what that's going to be yet. Got an idea, but haven't made up my mind. Anyway, that's all I got. See ya.